Our final speaker is Jeffrey Kroessler, who will be bringing us Tales from the Suburban City. His talk will focus on the preservation of open space within the larger context of our suburban neighborhoods, as integral to New York City's historical development as its dense urban fabric. His presentation will focus on Queens and the ongoing threats these neighborhoods face as privately owned open space is subordinated to inappropriately scaled new development. Jeffrey A. Kroessler is a longtime HDC board member. He's the author of New York Year by Year, The Greater New York Sports Chronology, and Historic Preservation in Queens. He received his doctorate in urban history from the City University of New York and is a librarian at John Jay College. He lives in Sunnyside Gardens and was a member of the community coalition that worked to see his neighborhood designated. Jeff.
Thank you. I mentioned suburbs as the former future of urban living because that's really what was the intention as the city grew. And in fact, suburbia is how the city grew. If you look at the population change in New York over the last century, you'll see that Manhattan peaks in about 1920, and its population steadily declined until the bad old days of the 1970s and 80s, when it begins to rebound because suddenly Manhattan is actually affordable and it's some of the best places to live in the city. You'll also notice that in the 1970s and 80s, that's when we actually lost population. From 1970 to 1980, we lost over 750,000 people in the city of New York, and that incidentally is when the preservation movement in New York City began to really take off. And I think that we should consider the fact that in a declining city, population-wise, the preservation movement did so much to bring this city back. You'll notice also in the borough of Brooklyn, it's consistent. It has grown consistently over time, but you'll also notice that it grows specifically 500,000 people in the 1920s. Where are those people moving to in the 1920s? Look at Queens. In 1920, Queens has almost 500,000 people. Its population doubles in the next decade to over 1 million people. So what we have is, again, building a city for 500,000 people. Where are these people living? You'll notice the Bronx also, and I might say Staten Island too. You'll notice the Bronx steadily grows, but then is in a period of decline, and I'm glad the Bronx is coming back. This is the percent of population in each borough, and you can see how Manhattan's percent has declined. In 1900, half the people in New York City lived in Manhattan. Today, it's 20% live in Manhattan. And you can see that it's a steady decline at the same time as the percent of the population in Queens and the Bronx rose steadily. Where are these people living? A lot of them are living in the new suburban neighborhoods of the city. That was the future that was built in the 20th century. You'll notice Brooklyn is about 1/3 of the population consistently, even as its numbers grew. There's still room in Staten Island if any of you are interested. This enormous growth in the outer boroughs, because that's really the population growth of the city, the redistribution, as Queens and outer Brooklyn are growing madly in the 1910s, 20s, into the 1940s and 50s even. During that period, Manhattan loses population but gains its distinctive skyline. That's the trade-off in a sense. And in Queens and in other places, we have a chance to start over again. We're not building the slum tenements that dominated the landscape in Manhattan, we have a chance to build new. And what we have here is Matthews model flats. This happens to be in Woodside. They built these in Sunnyside, acre after acre of them in Ridgewood. The brick all comes from Kroessler Brickworks in Staten Island. This was the G.X. Matthews Company, good German Catholics, working with a good German brickmaker on Staten Island. Chryslerville on Staten Island during World War I became known as Charleston. But this is a model tenement because it was built with fireproof materials, indoor plumbing. They're still railroad flats, but they are of a higher quality. If you want to know about the G.X. Matthews, they were such good German builders that they put in their light fixtures, they put gas lighting in all of their early apartments, and the gas lighting fixtures were equipped with electrical conduits. So they put in the electric lights, but in case this electric light thing didn't catch on, the building was already fitted with gas so that you could go back to good old gas light at no extra cost. There is a section of Matthews Flats which have been designated in Ridgewood, but that's about it, not blocks like this. But this is what a lot of the suburban city looked like. This is Rego Park, the Real Good Construction Company, and this covers acre and acre of Queens, and it's easy to make fun of this, but in fact what you have is a solution to the sins of the city, meaning individual home ownership. You have the individual single-family house for the single-family unit, getting rid of the overcrowded tenements that required boarders and multi-generations of families. What you have now is the single-family house, which is the American dream. The tenement is not the American dream, and never was until we began romanticizing it during those bad old days of the 1970s when the city became rediscovered. The other solution were the model communities, the planned communities. Tom already alluded to Jackson Heights. One thing, this is the same development by Andrew Thomas. One interesting side note, when the Metropolitan Life Insurance built model tenements in Queens in the early 1920s, it required a change of the state legislature to permit them to do that. They hired Andrew Thomas, who essentially built Jackson Heights for low-income people, without some of the design touches, but the same footprint, the same apartments, except for lower working people as opposed to the higher ups. And you can see that what they're intending is a strictly middle class environment. It was so strictly middle class with property ownership included that it was also restricted. No Jews were permitted originally in Jackson Heights until the Great Depression, when everyone lost their property, in which case, come on in. whoever can afford it can come on in. But this is Jackson Heights, which is one of the model communities that was built in the 20th century, and it was designated a historic district in 1993. I don't know of many threats to Jackson Heights in terms of the inner courtyards or the design. I think it's a very well-regulated and well-maintained historic district. I live in Sunnyside Gardens, which was designated in 2007, which was rather more of a tussle than it should have been to get designated. But here you can see the very original design based on the English Garden City movement, Hampstead Garden Suburb. The row houses, very calm palette of brick and wood, generous open plantings. It was designated in 2007, and during designation, the discussion was, what do we designate? And the plan of Sunnyside Gardens, with their common courtyards in the center of every block, with landscaping being so integral to the design, to the footprint of the buildings, all of that being protected by the city planning regulation, which Amanda Burden's city planning agency tossed aside to leave regulation to the Landmarks Commission. The Landmarks Commission assured the residents that we regulate 360 degrees around the property. We regulate the entire property, meaning landscaping. After designation, they said, we don't regulate planting, which really is the point. Eternal vigilance, these were both built after designation. I sent a violation report in to the one on the right and said, basically, in more polite terms, what the hell is going on? Did your staff approve this? You can't possibly have approved this. I wrote that just marginally more politely than I related to you. And I got a reply that said everything was done correctly, whatever that means. What we have, however, is paving over the backyard, concrete pillars, and certainly nothing that could be seen as being part of the historic design scale. The building on the left has an illegal addition, which has an illegal deck that extends beyond the addition. How this would not have been permitted under the previous zoning, but somehow Landmarks has let it slide. Part of it, if I can be cynical, is those poor Queens homeowners. I might throw in the word benighted. They just can't handle this complexity of regulation, despite the fact that 3/4 of the homeowners were pushing desperately for designation. So eternal vigilance. You've got problems in our suburban city which seem to be impossible to conceive of. This is a completely built block in Astoria, both sides of the street, and what they have are contiguous row houses with large front yards to permit the landscaping. This is the former future of urban building, meaning generous plantings and uniformity of scale, a very human environment, except that the zoning was not matched to it, so you're able to actually build on the front yard, which this one homeowner did. This is from like 15, 20 years ago. You'll notice the raw cinder block finish on one side. The neighbor was so angry, no, your workmen cannot come on my property to finish this. But that's basically what it has. In the years since, what you have is another one of these buildings with a monstrous addition built on the roof. I spared you that because there are children present. I want to thank Kevin Wolf for supplying these images. This is from Douglas Manor, a planned suburban community. Now we're getting away from the urban suburbs, the planned urban suburbs, to the real suburbs that we know what we mean. Douglaston being on the far northeastern tip of Queens, jutting out into Long Island Sound. And you can see the typical suburban design, the curving streets, but you'll notice also that it's divided up into many, many building lots. Here is the ideal, the Douglas Rickert, no, not Douglas, whichever, Rickert Finley Company developed this, and you can see how it developed slowly over time. Promising a quick commute via the Long Island Railroad. They were selling these houses before the tunnel was complete. They started building in 1906. The tunnel didn't come in for another 6 years, but what the heck, it's on its way. Just like the signs in the subway saying you'll be able to go on the Long Island Railroad to Grand Central sometime 2014. I don't think it'll be that close. But this is what it looks like on the ground. This is what was built. This is what was intended. This is a suburban utopia, if ever there was one. And this is what happened in the 1960s. In the distance, in the left-hand photograph, you can see the new construction built along the water. the very clunky, boxy, undistinguished structures, and the pornography I have on the right showing the destruction of a Dutch colonial. This destruction and rebuilding is what generated the need for preservation. And when we have, it's not just the architecture here, but the footprint is larger, the footprint is more paving. The entire aesthetic of this architecture, you can see the paved over driveway in the front. All of this suggests why historic preservation is necessary. And what you have is designation. And I've given one example from Kevin Wolf's work. You can see the house on the left before, and you can see how on the right you're able to add within the landscape so that it does not destroy the integrity of the garden suburb. No, this is the back of the house, and you can see everything on the left sticking out. That's the new house. That's the addition, the expansion of the house. A sad tale is a suburb north of Flushing, northeast of Flushing, Broadway Flushing. They have been working very hard to get designated as a historic district, developed at the same time as Douglas Manor by the same company, probably using the same builders and architects. This is the quality of the housing. We do not look at this as necessarily a historic district. I don't know how Douglaston got through, but convincing the Landmarks Commission that this is a historic district has been such a heavy lift. And it leads to the loss of major buildings on the corners. This property owner demolished a single-family Dutch colonial, wanted to build two houses where the zoning said, and the covenant, the historic covenant said one. And the end result was that the homeowners association went to court, and the judge said, yeah, that covenant you've got still in effect, only one house. So you've got an eyesore, but don't you just love it? But this is the contradiction. Douglaston is able to preserve itself by attaining historic designation. Broadway Flushing wants the same protection but is denied because of this catch-22 loop, namely the decision not to grant a public hearing, designate, is based on a number of inappropriate new buildings in the area. The numerous alterations to the houses, such as filling in of porches, re-siding, changing the shape and configuration of openings, and removal of decorative details, and lack of strong architectural significance. Thank you, Landmarks Preservation Commission. Can I take you on a walk on 8th Street in Greenwich Village if you want to see places that have no new siding or configured openings and all the rest? Forest Hills Gardens has a private corporation. They own the streets. There are not necessarily any problems with Forest Hills Gardens. They also have Forest Hills Gardens apartment buildings, which also have that generous open space protected by the Forest Hills Gardens Association, so there is not that problem as long as they keep renewing their homeowners covenants. North of Queens Boulevard, however, the Cordmeyer Company developed a very fine upscale suburban community from the 1910s to the 1930s of single-family houses which have no protection except their tradition of being a neighborhood of single-family houses. If you think, oh my God, I think I just caused a heart attack. Here is the difficulty. This neighborhood became home to an influx of new immigrants The Bukharian immigrant community, eastern from Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan, and they have been buying houses to build bigger and also covering over. What Evan said about the water, it just runs right off of here into the sewer system in Queens as well. You think Queens can handle it, but I don't think we're any different. It's nice, it's beautiful, what are you afraid of? And as one anonymous resident of the neighborhood put it, I could spit and throw up. Again, the paving, the loss of the suburban character of Queens and our city. I tried to make a case that this is our historic city. As the leader of the community put it, don't be upset with our people because we like to be large. Let me tell you something, in Queens, most of the houses is old, new people build a new city, it's good for the community. We can make fun of that. However, that's the same argument that Edward Glaser has in his new book, The Triumph of the City, namely, we have to accommodate new people and preservation is in the way of our new city to accommodate new peoples and new needs. I ask Ed Glaser to live here. The solution, actually, city planning came to the rescue, and they introduced a zoning change, which means you have to have the front yards line up, and you have to have a 25-foot maximum house wall. But the ethnic tensions that were inherent throughout this process, to some residents, this is from the Queen's Ledger, and I want to personally thank the Queen's Ledger for this very National Brotherhood Week kind of headline. To some residents, the Department of City Planning's rezoning proposal was a long-awaited solution to the problem of growing house sizes in the neighborhood. To others, the proposal represents an attack indicative of a growing void in understanding the Bukharian Jewish culture thriving in this section of Queens. That is an unbridgeable divide. And we have to make a choice as to what is best. What is best? What is aesthetically best? And I don't think that we can say, well, it's a matter of opinion, because some are better than others. And just so you don't think I'm entirely parochial, yesterday's Daily News, I read the Daily News because you find things out that you wouldn't find anywhere other than the Daily News. And they had a feature, if you're thinking of living in Bensonhurst, which I mentioned Queens having these suburban houses, so did Brooklyn. This is what was built in the growing city of the 1910s and 20s. Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, you can see this has been changed somewhat, but this isn't the future of Bensonhurst. This is what is being built without it, and you'll notice the absolute paving of the front yards and so forth. One house becomes two. This is the fate of our suburban city, and I think that we have acknowledged that this is a loss. Thank you very much.